I'm going to introduce an assignment that I've been using with my students for about 2 years, and like I said, all assignments are a work in progress. They change year after year. So what I'm going to be telling you about are most of the things that happened this past year and some things that I plan to do in the future, although I'm going to try not to really differentiate between those two while I'm talking to you. So I want to talk to you first a little bit about who I am and really the context in which I teach. So you can see a kind of a picture here of the lecture. This is a history lecture that all of my students attend at the same time. And I attend this lecture as well, and I'm in regular contact with the history lecture. It is a credit course that all of my students take. And it is one that my course, which is a critical reading and writing course, is aiming really to support in the long run. So what we need to do is create assignments that are going to mimic some of the things that they will be doing in this history course so that the students will really have an optimum chance of success at them. So obviously one of those things that we need to do is a paper. Although this isn't really the only aim of our course, it is definitely one that drives much of the content that we teach. We really do want students to write a paper effectively that argues a point supported by evidence, and that evidence hopefully comes from multiple sources. And although the reliability of those sources is sometimes questionable because my students are in really a first-year context and they're just really learning how to be reliable, it is something that is in the back of our minds, right? And it is something that is progressively taught both in our course and in some other support courses that my students take, plus the history courses as well. So we're really trying to introduce students to this idea of writing a paper in a North American university context with North American expectations and conventions. And my students, in fact, the majority of them come from China, although there's a spattering from Europe and from Ecuador. The majority are from China, so they do share some of the characteristics that we address maybe with some of these assignment tasks. So if you keep in mind this idea that really the main course aim is to write a paper that argues a specific point and it uses evidence, then we obviously are going to have some obstacles to that. So imagine that you are teaching these students about this particular type of assignment. What obstacles have you come across in teaching students how to use evidence and sources and so on? And as you type them in the chat box, I think I might be able to do a little typing. Let's see. Oops. Yeah, maybe not. Okay, so we've got in the chat box some different things. Let's see. Cultural background isn't there. They seem to copy what they read without truly understanding it. Sure. Vocabulary and word form, materials very complex. That's one I'm going to definitely address. Background knowledge is lacking. Certainly citation is an issue. Okay. Yep. Conventions of academic writing. Now I would have checked these on the slide. It's something I just will rely on the chat box as our historical archive. And I think you've gotten quite a few of them. So let's see if you did match the ones that I had suggested. And I think you did. So the obstacles pretty much that I'm finding with the students is that they do have a lack of complex topical background knowledge. You address that in the chat box. The students really just don't know enough about a particular topic. No, pretty much whatever topic it is that you give to them to be able to sufficiently write about it in a very academic or high-level way. Another problem is that most of them really just have an unfamiliarity with conventional essay structure. And when I say conventional essay structure, I am absolutely not referring to the 5-paragraph essay. I'm referring to actual essays that actually happen in university contexts. But that's a whole other issue. I find, too, they have difficulty building connections between different texts. And really that comes down to not only reading comprehension, but just simply being able to find the main idea or an author's point. And sometimes it's very difficult for them to recognize that even though it's not a direct connection between the points in different texts, there might be a connection that can be built there. Clearly, referencing issues are difficulties for international students, and until the students learn why it is important to reference, how to reference, and how those conventions are different than they are in their countries, it can often result in incidental or accidental, anyway, plagiarism. Many times students are, I find, inadequately using evidence. What they tend to do is really write about the superficial layer of things and not actually talk about really what's the meat of the text that they're trying to use. Another issue is that they take whatever it is that you use as an example, and they latch onto it and they reuse that over and over and over in their essays or in their writing anyway. So even if you do give them gambits of things to use, they tend to just reuse phrases over and over, or repeat that grammar structure over and over. And that's not necessarily something that you want to encourage continuously in a paper that they're writing. And then finally, I find students obviously they often just think it's boring to write an academic paper. They think it's really a necessary evil, something that they don't really want to do or really want to learn how to do. And they just don't really understand what it is that is going to be helpful about that. It's really just a necessary evil for them. So hopefully I can talk to you a little bit about how to overcome these obstacles with a particular type of writing assignment. So here is my solution, and that was to reduce the topical complexity and personalize the task to something that is more real life for them. I wanted to spread it into scaffolded steps. So that was a multi-purpose. One was so that I could kind of do some checks and balances throughout the writing process to make sure that they're actually doing it. It's also to break it into smaller chunks so that the students feel like they're supported by the teacher. And then also, when you do it in scaffolded steps, it really does reduce the ability to plagiarize, because you are there all along the way, and they aren't especially able to buy it off of someone. I wanted to incorporate some digital tools because my students seem to get a kick out of using the internet in class, so why not do that for a purpose that I want them to? I wanted them to work alongside other students, and I wanted them to model actions of those other students to show them what is a good way to write. And I wanted to do it myself as well, so I could model it for them. I wanted to give them timely feedback, something personalized that I can really comment to them specifically about their particular writing and their particular topic. And then finally, I wanted them to learn through doing, right? Instead of really just talking about essay writing in class, I really wanted them to actually do the steps and do the assignment and be into the assignment. So whether or not I accomplished that in full remains to be seen. But I'm going to tell you how I tried. So the term writing project that we had them do in my course is really just a research paper. The difference is between a full research paper and the one that I wanted them to do was many of those solutions. I wanted them to do it on a topic that was very close to home. And because my students are living in Toronto, I wanted them to do it about Toronto. And I thought this had a couple of different purposes. One was because they're new to Toronto, most of them, they don't really know much about the surroundings that they're living in. So this term project would really give them an opportunity to explore the city. And I thought that was a good thing. Another issue was, because it is about Toronto, they're going to be seeing and working and hands-on with the things that they're actually writing about that are in Toronto, instead of some abstract topic like coffee in Colombia or something like that. And finally, I wanted students to be able to talk to me about what it is that they're writing about. In particular, a topic that I was more or less familiar with. So then I could give them some background advice. I could give them some sources that they could take a look at. And I could kind of control more or less whether they were choosing good sources or different texts that had good information in them. So I broke it into really 6 steps. And these 6 steps, I think, are the more or less the basis of a writing process. The first step was to gather some information. Now, normally when you gather information about a very broad topic, like, you would just simply read a whole bunch of things, right? You would read and read and read and read and read and try to figure out what information is already out there. In this case, I wanted students to experience Toronto, and I wanted them to go out and explore Toronto. So instead of having them just read about Toronto, I suggested that they take photos of Toronto. So I gave students a couple of weeks, and I told them very little. I didn't give them a whole lot of direction, but I did tell them, I want you to go around Toronto, and I want you to visit different neighborhoods of Toronto, and I wanted you to take photos that you thought were interesting. So the only stipulation I had was that I didn't want students to take the same photos as every other student and take 5 of the same place. I told them, try different angles, try different sizes, try different perspectives, try to look for things that are content that are, different in each photo, something that's going to be variety in any case. And I asked students to take no less than 40 photos. So really, all they had to do was walk around Toronto and take photos of things that really they thought were interesting. And that was my way of getting them to explore Toronto and get very, very background information about Toronto. And I think they quite liked it because they did, in fact, take quite a wide variety of photos. And after they had finished, I had them put their photos onto a photo account. So they could do it on Google+, or they could do it on Flickr, and they all shared the URLs to their photo album with me. So I could take a look and see if they had, in fact, taken photos. And the other thing I wanted them to do with each of the photos was to actually describe the photo. So instead of just being 40 random photos about Toronto, they had to put a little bit about it, such as the date that it was taken, where it was taken, and a really brief description of what was happening in the photo. And I think this mimics good digital citizenship because it teaches them a little bit about literacy. Of course, it's about their own photos, but in this case, they're still cognizant and thinking of, okay, where was the photo taken? When was the photo taken? And what's happening in the photo. So they're thinking really about the same 3 things that they would be looking at if they took an image from the internet. So step 2, you might wonder, is, okay, now that they've got these 40 photos, what are they supposed to do with them? How are they supposed to derive a topic out of this? And the idea in step 2 is really for them to thematize their photos. I wanted them to get in the practice of trying to build connections between things that maybe don't obviously have a connection. Try to look for themes and patterns in different things. And let's start with their photos. So I gave them the instructions of what I want to do is look at your photos, and I want you to look for any kind of similarities between the photos. They could be the content of the photos, they could be the angles of the photos, they could be problems that you're noticing, and I want you to build those themes within your photos. Adele, just to answer your question, my students are pre-sessional students at the University of Toronto. So they've been admitted to the Faculty of Arts and Science in whatever degree program it is that they academically qualified. But their language proficiencies were just below direct entry, so they have been offered my program, which is 24 weeks in total. So this assignment that we're doing is actually spread over the first 12 weeks, the first term. So here we have kind of an example of how a student is thematizing their photos. And in class, I do an example of this with the students, and this is what it looks like. They are motivated because there is marks for this, so absolutely. In this case, this is a model of, let's say, 16 photos that a student had been taken or have taken over those times. And in step 1, That's all they needed to do was take photos of things that they thought were interesting in Toronto, and I did the same thing along with them. So now in step 2, what they need to do is they need to find patterns in those photos. And I suggested maybe 3 different patterns or 3 different themes that they find. So I'm curious, if you look at these photos right now, do you see any themes or any patterns amongst the photos that we could possibly narrow a topic from broad, which is Toronto, into something a little bit more focused? And if you can think of a theme, put it in the chat box and we'll see if you've chosen the same theme as I did. None of you've gotten, well, sort of. Michelle's a little bit close to the one that I chose, but the one thing that the students do know at this point is that they do know that it is leading them towards an essay topic. So, of course, they want to pick something that is relevant to them and interesting for them and that they can spend time reading about. So leisurely activities is popular, actually, as is transportation is usually popular, too. However, in this case, I picked out these 3 photos, which were about condos. So in the first photo at the top, you can see some condo construction at the back. The second photo is modern, smaller looking condo. And the third photo is looking down for condo as well. So that was the one theme that I pulled out of these photos. And there's many others, obviously. So what students are going to do then is they're going to take these themes and submit them to me for step 2 checking. So they write out a little bit with the 3 photos or the 4 photos that they have. They name the theme, and then they send that to me so that I can give some feedback on whether or not really are they going to find material about those themes or not. Because eventually, of course, they have to move from photos to actual texts that have information in them. So imagine that a student had said, oh, you know, I found flowers in parks as one of my themes. Okay, great. You know, that might be an interesting topic, but I'm not so certain that there's a whole lot written about the flowers in parks. So that's where I would give feedback on what themes maybe work and what themes don't work well. So in step 3, in step 2, they're building those themes, but then they're also going to be thinking about what it is that they can find out about those themes. Because now they have to move from their photos into something a little bit more text-based. So I want them to create some research questions about whatever theme it is that they have selected. So if we were going to pick condos and we wanted to do some background information about condos in Toronto, just so we can learn something about it, what kind of questions do you think would be good to ask as a research question? How many condos are there in Toronto? That was one question I thought would come up. What are the benefits of condo living? Sounds good. Where are they mostly sited? How much do condos in Toronto cost? Are there amenities and fees? Sure. These are all types of questions that I would want students to generate and put down when they submit this step so that I can see these are the things that you're curious about. So here are some examples that I here. How many condos are under construction in Toronto right now? What percentage of Torontonians live in condos compared to houses? Are the condo-related issues that with certain developers? And finally, what benefits and detriments are created for the city through further condo development? So I'm trying to encourage students to think of research questions that are not simply yes or no questions or, you know, statistics and numbers, but also stuff that might have some kind of debatable point. And throughout the class, we are talking in lessons about how to create research questions as well. So it's not them simply left to their own. So what they do with this then is they submit it to me and I give some feedback to them about not only the themes that they've created from their photos, but also the research questions that they have put together. So that is really what they're doing in step 2, building those connections, and in fact, some research you would be curious about to get some background information about that. So in step 3, what we're going to be doing is taking those that feedback that I give them, narrow one of those themes that they have chosen, research about those research questions they have written on the internet. And the reason why I chose the internet in this case is because I'm really interested in actively looking for information and not think it's really much of a burden. So reduce maybe in the next term going to the library a little bit more often and relying on books and journal articles and things. But this time I really want them just to get interested in the topic. So I gave them sources like Toronto Life magazine or video or even the Toronto Star, things that are available easily online. And I want the students in step 3 to find out as much information that they can those research questions that they had made in step 2. So that's what they have to do. All they have to do is go figure that out. And this is really what they're in terms of the writing process as well, is in a normal writing process, they also figure out what it is that they want to talk about, and they go look for information to find out as much background information about it as they can. So I'll pause for just a second because I hear some sound issues. Everybody can hear okay still?
Yeah, no, I can hear you. I just have a question to Fred. Can you help us if there is any other problem like this? Maybe you can continue, Tyson, and if we experience it again, then we will ask for a professional help.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks.
So Michelle, I hear what you're saying in that there are some restrictions, and I will try not to move my hands. Obviously, you have to be able to do things for your own context, and I'm just lucky that I control and do this in. So maybe there's something from this that you can adapt for yourself. So what happens after they've evaluated the information and they found information online about those research questions? Then what they need to do is they need to outline their ideas, what they're going to be writing about, and annotate them as well, annotate the sources. This is something that is very common in academic writing to submit a kind of proposal. So where I that is, I want to have them work on it through Docs. And I really recommend Google Docs. A couple of reasons. One is that you can collaboratively document at the same time as someone else. And two is give feedback very easily instead of doing it in Word and then sending it by email. I can give it much more real time. So if you want to click on that link, maybe you can't. If you want to click on that link, it'll take you to Google Doc. And what you'll see on that Google Doc is an of this exact assignment that I hand in. It is an annotated bibliography, and what they need to do with their readings from step 3 is find information about their topic, a current reality paragraph about that topic, and then finally annotate some sources. You'll see those annotations on the second page. If you come back to a big blue button, I'm just going to quickly explain how I use this with students. So I give them real-time feedback, and that means that they share this document that they've started, and I use some of the features which you can see happening on that Google Doc. One of the features is the suggesting feedback, and that's actually kind of over here up at the top right of the Google Doc. If I move it into suggesting mode, then what happens is a kind of track changes. So you can see right here, if you're looking at the red button on the slide, you can see that I've actually corrected something that the student has written. And instead of simply and they don't see what it is that suggestion turn into a kind of track changes, just like Word, and the student can see, in fact, what it is that I've suggested to change. And then over here at the top, you can see it has turned into a quasi-comment as well. And the student, if they like it and they think it's a good idea, then they will just take this and they will resolve it. Another function that I use to give feedback is the function. And you can see down here in the yellow, that suggests that there is a comment that I've put on there. And the way that I did that was I highlighted that little part. I went here to this commenting button, and then I typed comment, and you can see that comment is over here. So if you actually go to the Google Doc that's through this link, see that exactly, and feel free to go around and type something on the Google Doc. Feel free to use the suggestions and the comments and the track changes and do whatever you want on that document just to play around with it. No problem. So really in step 4, what's happening is the student is typing on the Google Doc, and I can actually give them while they're typing if need be, sort of like an office hours. In step 5, what happens is the student has gotten back about their annotated bibliography, and now it is time for them to actually do the writing of the paper. So the instructions for the students are the very simple instructions that you would give any student in terms of what the research paper should look like in terms of length, style, formatting, and so on. So I give them those instructions, and in this case it was, you need to write a paper, it's got to be 1,200 words, you need to use Chicago style referencing, and some of the ideas that you had from and revisit them into a draft for step 5, which is really the paper. And what I'm going to do with students is I'm going to allow them to write the paper on Google Docs, and I'm going to be able to go in and take a look at what they're writing in different stages as they're writing this and give feedback the same way that the suggesting and the commenting function. So that's great. But what I'm also going to do, I'm going to do my writing process as well. So I think it's important to give students a model. See, in fact, someone else doing the assignment along. They can see keeping speed instructor thinks is the right amount of time to spend on each, and the step 5, which is the actual paper. And they can also see really what the process is that I go through, so that they don't think I just write one draft and it's perfect. So if you click on the link that is underneath drafting and modeling in Google Docs in Vocaroo, then you will go to a document that shows this process. And you can't do anything on this document because I've made it impossible for you to type on, because I didn't want you to play around with it like the last one. But I'm going to tell you really what it is that I do with this document. So you can come back to big blue button and I'll tell you. So what you can see on this document is kind of like this page here. There's a few things that I can do that I haven't talked to you about, though I've seen mentioned in the chat. One thing that's really cool about Google Docs is the revision history. And revision history shows every edit that has happened over time to a particular document. And I thought to myself, how can I use this to help students? Well, one thing I can do is when students are writing something, I can go back through and see what it is that they've changed about their document. And this is a really useful tool, especially when you are looking at a final product that you think has been plagiarized in some form or other. When you get a document where you think it is that a student has copied or pasted, you might bring that student in to talk to them about their drafts And there's lots of times, at least with my students, where they say, you know what, I don't have a draft. I have saved over top of that draft. And if you do it through Google Docs, you can actually verify whether that's true or not. So in Google Docs, if they do their entire paper through Google Docs, you can go through their revision history to see where their edits are, what they've copied and pasted, how they've made changes. And it can be good for them as a backup to prove to you that they haven't actually plagiarized. However, I can also use this as an instructor. So what I'm going to do is model to the students, in this case, how I write. So you can see on that document some paragraphs. I think it's the introduction of my step 5 that I've done for students to model. And if the student clicks on File, I think, and then goes down to Revision History, then what they'll see is this menu that shows up on the right-hand side. And you can see all of the edits that I had made to this document. So all a student needs to do, really, is click on one of them, and it highlights what I did at that particular time. So you can see I've highlighted, or I've clicked on October 23rd, and then it showed in green the things that I had changed on that day. So what students can see is every time I've gone through revising my draft, they can see the types of edits that I've made. So I'm really trying to model to them that writing is a process. It's not something that you just sit down, write all in one shot, and then it's over. Even I need to go through and do some revisions myself after rereading and adding more things. Now, the other thing about this that I can do with students is it's great to do the revision history and to leave students up to them to check out the revision history, but even the revision history doesn't tell you why you did something exactly. All it does is it shows you which edits you in fact did make. So if you're in suggestion mode, you can see that through track changes anyway. And I think it's valuable for the students to be able to understand why it was that I tweaked something. Why did I read in a certain way? Why did I take out a certain piece of information? So what I did as a model for students in this case is I turned on the suggestion mode. I edited the text as I would normally do so that they can see that revision history, and they can also see all the track changes sort of in green and with the lines through it and so on. But in addition, I highlighted different different changes that I'd made, and I went to a website called Vocaroo, and I recorded a little commentary to my students about why I actually did something. So what you can see is if you go to that actual document, you will see sort of maybe something highlighted. And then over here on the right-hand side, you'll see a comment box, and it probably says commentary, and then a little link to a Vocaroo. And if you want, you can go take a look at that, click on the Vocaroo link, and hopefully, if it's still active, the Vocaroo link will speak to you and they will tell you something. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes, and I want you to go over to that link there. I'm going to shut up, and I want you to just click around and listen to some of the commentary that I've made. So I'll give you 2 minutes, I think, to do that. And then once you do, come back and raise your hand. Okay, so if you come back, then it looks as though most people have tried out some of the Vocaroo links. And I've addressed a couple of things in the chat box, but one thing I want to mention is I like to use Vocaroo. It's really not difficult. I did try Kazina, and there's a learning curve, actually, to some of the apps that you can install with Google Docs. And I really didn't want to go through that learning curve. One thing that you need to really think about is, can the students see the different things that you are putting on there if they're not signed in through Google? Because I didn't want to force my students to sign up with Google if they didn't want to see my document. Now, of course, when they're doing their own documents, they do need to sign up and have a Google account. But there's just too many things that I wanted to do, and I didn't really want to figure out and have some problems come up. So I really did trust Vocaroo. I knew the commenting function was going to work, and I knew the Vocaroo link was going to work. So I went with the path of least resistance, really. So finally, after they have done the process, I wanted them to reflect. So the last step really is just adding that last bit of reflection piece to their writing. And I basically asked them this question: what did you learn about yourself during this process? And asked them to write about 500 words about that. More or less, they talked about how they had enjoyed the Google Docs process, how they thought it was really good to have the feedback from the instructor almost 24 hours a day. If I happened to be online, they didn't wait and they could see what I was doing along with them. And they felt that that was a good way to get them to check to see whether they were doing things at the right speed or whether they were doing things correctly, and really confirm that they were doing things in the right way. So what you can do on this link here is, this is really just a blog post, and it's a blog post that talks about this process that I have more or less been telling you about. And yeah, that's most of the assignment. So I will do some questions in a little bit. I did want to briefly mention my timeline, because I know everybody's context is different, and you may, or almost definitely will have to adapt things so that it fits your students. I have 12 weeks in a term, so this is largely how I had people do things. So in step one, which, if you remember, was really just taking photos, trying to get a little bit of exploratory research done about Toronto, that was about 2 weeks. I gave them 1 week then to build the connections between those photos and find some themes, as well as create some research questions to submit to me for feedback. After they got that feedback in step two, then they had 2 more weeks to read about Toronto in terms of condos, if that's what it was that they chose. So they looked online, they found sources, they summarized those sources, and they found as much information to answer those research questions as possible. Then in step 4, which was another 3 weeks, they took that information, they thought about how they were going to use it, they outlined their paper, and they annotated their sources and gave me some back information about the topic so that I would catch up to what it is that they're talking about. In step 5 was the actual writing of the paper, and that took another 3 weeks, more or less. And then finally, 1 week to finish the reflection after they'd submitted their research paper. So 12 weeks in total is what I have afforded to me. So I would like to more or less stop me talking about my research process and my digital assignment. I hope you kind of enjoyed what it is that I was talking about, and I'm sure there might be some questions. I will want to also give you another link. If you don't have a Google Drive yourself, I've put together just a sample page that you could go around, and you don't need to sign up for Google. You can just go and sign on anonymously and just play around with this document as much as you like, just to get some practice with Google Documents. And then maybe that will convince you to actually take the leap, make the Google account, and get your own Drive so that you can make Google Docs yourself. So we're at 4 o'clock my time, which means we have about 10 or 15 minutes, I think, for some questions. So does anybody have anything that they would like to know? Did I skip over anything? Did I make any sense? Let me know. All of the instructions that I just mentioned for each step are on this link. So if you click that link that's now in the chat box, you'll have that exact assignment, the whole shebang. So you can see exactly what it is that I was talking about a little bit in more detail. But it's kind of wordy at the point for a workshop, so read it on your own time. So Adele, how much time do you actually spend in the classroom? So per week, I have 6 hours of instruction. So I actually meet them twice in 2 3-hour chunks. And during that time, we do lessons more specifically on language, but that they can use particularly in these in this assignment. And I go through modeling many of the steps actually in the assignment so that they're not really just left to their own to read the instructions and figure out how to do it. Yeah, I like the blended approach. Of course, it says a digital assignment, so it's not completely digital. There's a lot that we do in classes as well. And I'll give you another blog post just for your reference. But if you go to this one, it's not about this assignment specifically, but it is about other ways that I've used Google Docs with students. And one of those ways is to actually use the Google Doc in class with students and have the Google Doc projected on the board. And that way, everybody can log on to this Google document. They can type, they can share, they can collaboratively write in class, and they can actually see it on the projection as well, which is kind of cool. So that's just one thing that I do. Great, Mike. I hope you do see some different ways, and I really don't expect everyone's going to be able to use this exact assignment, nor do I really want you to, but I really want you to just be inspired by some of those things and give it a shot in some way or other. My email is really all over the place, so if you Google me, you'll find it, but that about me has contact. Let's see. There's my actual email address, but I'm really easy to find online.